We will be covering the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. A bit of a mouthful, but we'll try and keep that going. I'm Adriaan Bekker, Director of Microsoft Security Services at Softworks. Please feel free to connect to me on LinkedIn or message me directly with any questions that I may or may not answer during this session. If we run out of time, as today is going to be possibly quite a heavy session to cover with every detail. As the last few people are joining, I will just run through the agenda for today. We'll be covering off the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. We'll do a deep dive. From now on, I'm going to call it the MCRA, as it's too much of a mouthful. We will also look at Microsoft capability mapping from a security standpoint by your role, and then finally just address the questions and answers. But as always, we'd like to start off with some news. Microsoft has just been named the #1 or largest supplier based on market share for modern endpoint security. They now own more than 25% of the market. Roughly, when I looked, it's just worth over $11 at the moment. Second is we've got CrowdStrike, which second. Well, at the moment, just read an article today where people are looking to change due to the slight update incident that they had which caused the biggest cyber attack in the world. But what's interesting, between Microsoft and CrowdStrike, they own approximately 45% of the market, and all of the other suppliers have the rest of the market. In Purview news, lots of updates around Purview and XDR, but the new eDiscovery preview has just gone live, which will combine the premium and the normal eDiscovery into a single interface, and you will see features and options depending on what license you have. It should make less clicks needed to do eDiscovery. It should make it easier to find information and target the information you have. I'm looking forward to testing it myself, and we will give you an update around the new eDiscovery and Purview interfaces as we get more visibility. We've also got for Copilot for M365, as you've probably seen, that's moving ahead at a phenomenal rate. You can now bring your own data into it. And I think Microsoft has just announced they'll increase records from 50,000 to 5 million records that you can bring in as free of charge as part of your Copilot for M365 license. But we're seeing more and more people leveraging the Copilot for Microsoft 365 at the moment, and more done. And the features and the updates, it's just amazing how much new features they are bringing out. So we've got Recap, which is something I'm using quite significantly. Recap my week, recap a meeting, recap what's happening in the few days that I've been out. And finally, staying on the Copilot theme, Microsoft has launched the Copilot for Microsoft 365 Risk Assessment Quick Start Guide. It's a great way to start because a lot of the feedback from CISOs, from organizations is, how do I do a risk assessment on Copilot? What are the business risks regarding Copilot that we have inside the organization? How do I actually understand that risk? Microsoft has published the Quick Start Guide. It will be available via a link in the Q&A section. So please feel free to download it, have a look at it. Do take note, you consume it as is, as Microsoft like to say, but I found it very useful to help explain to our business regarding risks around Microsoft 365 and how we ascertain and evaluate those risks. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to start off with the MCRA. And the MCRA is the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture, which explains all of the security features that Microsoft now have in play in the Microsoft 365 world, as well as the Defender for Cloud world around security. And this architecture keeps changing and keeps growing. But for a lot of organizations, they haven't realized that Microsoft is a security, or is now the biggest security provider in the world. If you look at what they're spending, 20 odd billion over the next 5 years. They've got 34,000 people working in their trust centers and security centers. They've actually now made security a as part of the employee review. So performance management of employees, security is at the heart of everything they do. Security is even as part of the employee performance appraisals every year. And that's quite interesting. But for organizations and people that we deal with, they still think of Microsoft a lot of times as just providing the Microsoft software, and you need to go and license software from other vendors because that's what we always used to do. And I think what this shows is how Microsoft has matured, the capabilities of Microsoft, and more ironically, a lot of these features and security is part of the existing licenses that customers owns. They just don't know it's available. And what I'm going to try and do is just talk high level through each of these features very, very quickly, try and give you an understanding of where we are and the art of what's possible. And what we'll do is we'll start with the whole endpoint security section. And when we start at endpoint, you have two areas that you can think about: the unified endpoint management, which is basically you've got Intune, which helps you manage devices and help send out configuration with configuration to these devices. And what's positive is Microsoft don't care if it's Apple, Android, Linux. All of these systems can be managed and configured via Intune, and help with configuration of packages down to those specific devices. And I think this is quite important, because with Intune enabled devices, you can start managing things like endpoint compliance on those devices. You can start thinking about protecting data, and we'll cover some of those areas. But you have a single interface where you can see all of your devices in a single interface and publish applications down to those devices. We then look at Defender for Endpoint, and Defender for Endpoint has been around for a while, and it is additional included in Business Premium or licensed separately as Defender for Endpoint P2 or part of the M365 E5 Security Suite or E5 license. Now, it contains a significant part of security. We're all familiar, hopefully, with the endpoint detection response, which is beyond the normal antivirus, but looks at behavior, look at how systems are behaving, correlates threats, correlates activities, and then identify threat actors inside the endpoint. And not only that, it will also do passive scanning of the network. It does contain some web content filtering, and being open and honest with everybody on the call, it's not very good. It's very basic, but it will help if you don't have any web content filtering available at the moment, if you're not using other party solutions, which is currently still better, like Zscaler, Netscope, and a few other, SensorNet, for example, any of those three, depending on what you have. But we're seeing that organizations who have no web content filtering still like to enable this, still able to use it because it is better than what they've got currently. A big other area is the threat and vulnerability management, and this is coming on leaps and bounds, where we can see current threats that is available on my systems. What threats is there? What is currently exploited? What is my highest risk area that I should be patching, and vulnerabilities that I should address? And that's all built into Defender for Endpoint. Now you can go and view those vulnerabilities very quickly. It helps you understand where we should be addressing and help us prioritize what threats we should patch very quickly from a point of view. And also it's got data DLP prevention in. This is very much linked back to your Purview license, but on the endpoint, you can enable data loss prevention and look for tags, key phrases, labels, for example, and you can prevent data from being uploaded to the internet, potentially exfiltrated via Teams. But again, data loss prevention is now built into the endpoint and can be leveraged on an ongoing basis. And then if we go down to the bottom, all part of the endpoint security is very much your Windows 11, Windows 10 and Windows 11 features. And if we think about Windows 10, it's end of life next year. So if you don't have a strategy, start thinking about how you're going to upgrade all of your Windows 10 machines to Windows 11. We need to make sure we get that. But you can start configuring the security, which is linked back into your Defender for endpoint, but you can turn on the full disk encryption, look at attack surface reduction to prevent bad actors from potentially compromising the system, configuring application control, looking at behavior monitoring, protecting credentials, locking credentials down, and then also the network protection, which is, yes, it's got the firewall, but again, with Defender for endpoint deployed, if we detect that there's a potential device that is compromised IP, immediately it will communicate to the rest of the network to ignore traffic from that compromised device or compromised environment. And I think the security on Windows 11 is where we see people complain that, oh, my security is not very good, but realize that they haven't configured any of these areas to be secure. And this is one of the pieces that people don't realize. Always think I need to go and buy other software or additional software, but you already own it as part of your Windows or your Windows Enterprise licenses that you get as part of your M365. We then start moving across to the right-hand side of the system, which is your Entra ID, or as we all used to remember it, Azure AD, Active Directory, but it's now called Entra, just because Microsoft loves changing names on an ongoing basis. Now with your Microsoft Entra, it is really about dealing with identity and access management across your estate and across your environment. So with Entra, yes, you have your Azure AD governance in place, and you can configure your passwordless Hello for Business or MFA, as well as connecting not just the Authenticator app, but potentially also using FIDO2 key compliant keys inside the system, where you need an actual key to unlock the device or unlock your phone to get access to systems. We've also got Entra ID protection, which looks at potential credentials has been leaked, looking at behavior and analytics. Where do you log on? What's happened? Is it impossible travel, or what's strange behavior? Has somebody tried to log in 5 or 8 times and suddenly successful? Why are they now successful? But you can link that all together. We can also configure privileged identity management around providing just enough access or forcing users to authenticate access when they want to escalate to a higher level access or request software information. And then we can also link it back down to our on-prem system with Defender for Identity, which will look at potential credentials that's been compromised on your local Active Directory in real time, notifying you either into your XDR console or into Microsoft Sentinel, which we will touch on. But everything starts with identity and access. And because you can link this all into your single sign-on, link it together with external IDs, this is a fantastic way to have your central authentication configured leveraging Microsoft Entra. And for most organizations with Business Premium, you get at least Plan 1. And if you've got M365 E5 or security, you get Plan 2, which gives you all of the advanced features. But we're not on a license crusade today. Then we start talking about purview, or how do I protect my information? How do I classify my documents? And this is where we start seeing more areas around security and compliance. And again, this is a big subject to cover off. But with Microsoft Purview, we are able to classify our data, protect it, monitor it, and also start creating what we call data lifecycle management. For example, label a piece of data, have it deleted after 7 years automatically, prevent it from being deleted. We can also start creating data governance, insider risk configurations regarding what information has been uploaded, why has somebody reclassified data. We can be able to really understand the information we hold, protect that information, and then link that back into the data loss prevention because we've classified the information as critical internal only, we can create a policy and a label that we can then look for in the data loss prevention on the endpoint, preventing that document from being downloaded to a USB drive or uploaded to Dropbox or any of the other providers or methods where data can be exfilled. But that's a big positive for organizations. And Purview is one of these sections which is massive. But this is a great place to start. How do I protect my information? How do I classify my information? How do I manage that life cycle? What's the taxonomy that we have? On top of that, we can look at e-discovery, go and discover the information that's being done or utilize, what information is potentially being held. And again, this is all part of Purview. It's all part of the M365, but this is very much aimed at my data governance and security around data hygiene. We've then got our software as a service section that we have in place. And again, if we touch on this very quickly, with the Entra ID, with this, with the software as a service, you can leverage all of your Entra IDs using your conditional access to validate that we not only trust the user, but the device before we allow them to log on to things like Salesforce, Box, into our own Microsoft environment. But we can control all of that secure access via conditional access and also leveraging further enhancements with intra-internet access security that we can link together. But what we've then got wrapped around that is Defender for Cloud Apps, which will help you understand what shadow IT, what applications are being utilized inside your business and what people are accessing. Because what we've seen quite regularly with in Defender is the number of people using their own, shall we say, bring your own AI to work, leveraging systems like Dropbox when they're supposed to be using Teams or any of the other methods that the organizations have, or connecting to potential phishing sites. So we've got the threat detection. We can enforce the policy again. We can monitor and block applications when we see significant upload of data to these applications. And then again, configure our DLP policies, linking that back into our purview that says if a document's classified or labeled in a certain way, prevent it from being uploaded, prevent it from being placed into any of these applications that we work with. And if it's an unsanctioned app, understand what is that risk score of that unsanctioned app. Do we want to utilize it or don't we want to utilize it? But again, significant abilities in Defender for Cloud Apps. We see people tend to deploy it out the box, monitor it, don't really access it, and don't enforce a lot of the DLP policies. Again, this is very much part of your M365 E5 security or E5 license, or can be added on as a separate license to any of the business premium licenses, for example. But it all starts with your Entra ID, your conditional access policies regarding will only allow compliant devices that's encrypted to connect to our network, will only allow people to sign into Salesforce via a single sign-on, and they never know the password for their environment. It also means that when you disable a user or somebody leaves, by removing their access, you ensure that their access is removed to all of the third-party apps or software as a service that they are consuming in the cloud. We've now started looking at a feature that's included, which I call people security, which is again quite an interesting point of view. And there's a number of areas that's included already inside the system. The attack simulator, where you can send your own phishing emails to your staff. I will be honest, the built-in version is not very good. You've got to create your own templates, but it will do it will provide you with an update of who clicked on what, how many people failed their phishing test, but it will help you understand how you can attack that. You can also do the passwordless attack, so check for the risky passwords. And then if we link back into Purview or M365 E5, we can start looking at what we call insider risk management. And for customers who's leveraging data. So let's say, for example, you're using Purview, you want to see which users are lowering the classifications on documents. We can create insider risk management policies that will notify us that user X has downgraded 10 documents from highly sensitive to public consumption, for example. But we can get those alerts. Or Adriaan has just resigned. Suddenly he's downloading 50 classified documents. Maybe legal need to go and have a quick chat to him. But we can also look at things like communication compliance, which is look for offensive language, look for threatening behavior, look for customer complaints, look for policies or risks that we might want to be notified of where people are communicating potential sensitive information or personal identifiable information out of the environment. So we've got all of these areas that we can configure around the people security. At the bottom, I'll just cover this briefly. You've also got GitHub Advanced Security and DevOps Security, which is very much there to help with the development lifecycle. Is my coding secure? Do I have any vulnerabilities in what we are deploying? And also monitoring the DevOps environment from a security and risk point of view. I'll be honest, I'm not an expert in this, but feel free to speak to us and we can get one of our team to have a further talk to you around the security, because again, this can be monitored, but this helps with the security around development, the development life cycle. Then we start looking at what we call our cloud and on-prem or infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. How do we actually protect our environments? And firstly, we've got the Defender for Cloud across your environment, and there's a number of these. There's about 11 Defender for Cloud systems in there, and those are things like Defender for Server P2, Defender for SQL, Defender for Key Vault Storage. Go and turn these on if you haven't done so. It will tell you the vulnerabilities. It will highlight risks inside your business. And then also your posture management and compliance with CSPM, which will help you understand what is my exposure, what type of security we have, what risks do we have, how do we comply with our ISO baseline. Again, fantastic features. A lot of organizations don't leverage it. You've got your secure score as well for your cloud environment, which will help you understand what's my critical path. Do we have risks we need to address? What is my compliance currently based on our current configuration? And then if we link that back to internet and intranet security, you've got your Azure firewall, your Azure WAF, web access firewall, DDoS protection, key vaults, Azure Bastion, which again is a way of accessing servers securely without exposing them to the internet, Azure backup for recovery, and there's significantly other areas. But then think about, what do we do? How do we implement DLP configuration? How do we bring in our on-premise environment? Again, Linux, Windows don't really mind what you've got running from a point of view. How do we link this all back together into our AWS environment? How do I get that holistic view across my business? And this all comes to, how am I going to implement Defender? How am I going to leverage my cloud resources? And how do I have visibility around the risks? And that's probably the biggest area what I would like to highlight at the moment is think about the risks. The amount of time we see Azure platforms being configured but not secured is very interesting, where people have accidentally left open ports or not aware that they have got ports, not done a security review in a long time, not actually tested, can I recover my Azure environment? It all comes back to, how have you got it configured? Are you leveraging the tools that's already in place and most out of it? And a lot of these securities are not very expensive. So for example, Defender for Server P2 is about 11 or 12 pounds per server per month, but shows you all your vulnerabilities, looks at potential applications. You can configure applications that's not being utilized regularly to be blocked on the server. So if somebody installs a new app that can potentially leak data out, it can be stopped. There is so much to talk about around the security, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detections. All of that can be linked back in together, but again, we can pick that up separately because I'm conscious of time. Then IoT, or operational technology, as we like to call it, SCADA. And again, with XDR, a lot of these are now built in. So for customers who've got M365 E5, you've got the Defender for IoT that's already built into the endpoint client. But then we can also deploy the OT or security, which will do the port replication, scan every port, every piece of traffic that goes through specific switches and firewalls, and notify you of potential risks and vulnerabilities based on those SCADA systems. That is a separate, but again, that can be fed back into your single XDR console to give you that single overview. And what we are seeing previously, IoT or SCADA system or OT, operational technology, was dealt by a different team versus the IT team. However, these areas are now linked. The technology is linked more and more, and you got to have that central point of view of how do they work together, because at the end of the day, it might be, unless it's air gapped, you still need to have communications to this environment. It needs to be monitored, and as more and more of these technologies are cloud-based, we're seeing that potential risk of security and vulnerability around the environment. But again, this is all available. A lot of people are not aware that that's available regarding the OT information. And then we can start talking about SQL and all of the other products around there. And then the final section that we talk about is the Security Operations Center, or SOC. How do we run the Security Operations Center? How do we deal with that? And for the Microsoft Security Operations Center, Microsoft has built the new Microsoft Defender XDR, or Unified Threat Detection and Response, which is if you go to security.microsoft.com, is the new XDR interface that's been made available. But with that, you can start creating some automation, do some basic threat hunting, feed some threat intelligence into the environment by leveraging Microsoft Sentinel. And what that means is you can take all of these systems that we talked about earlier, your endpoints, your office security, identity, software as a service, data, IoT, other platforms like Azure or AWS, Google Cloud, bring that all into Defender, leveraging the intelligence, and are able to then to threat hunt and automate a lot of your responses and investigate incidents. And what you can do is you can escalate that to Microsoft Security Operations, but that's normally more for enterprise, large enterprise customers. And trust me, it is very expensive to get onto that team. But you can also speak to people like Softworks who run Secure 365, which configure and maintain this in your environment with no data leaving your environment, but our experts taking a monitoring and taking for you on a 24/7 basis. But again, all of this is available right now. And with the new Defender for XDR, you can start seeing attack paths. You can see potential high risk exploitation of devices inside your network, and the visibility that's happening is significant. And Microsoft Security Copilot sits across all of these environments. It's still very expensive at about 100,000 starting price for 3 compute units per month or per annum. It's about 90,000 sterling, 100,000, just over $100,000. But again, it can help you with your advanced security. It can help you with some of the understanding what PowerShell scripts are doing, what sort of threats are happening in place. But again, this technology is available. It's getting there. It's not in preview anymore. You'll be happy to know it's now in production. But we see that continuous investment by Microsoft around security. And I think for CISOs, for or engineers, CTOs, having a good understanding of the Microsoft Security Reference Architecture is a great place to start when you try and communicate how a Microsoft first approach or what does that attack surface look like for our organization? Where do we fit into this big reference architecture, and what technologies can we leverage to protect our environment? And I think this then brings us to, well, that's great, Adriaan. You've just showed me so much information. Where does this actually fit into my job role? Where should I look at what I should be leveraging? And we've got the Microsoft Security capability mapping around roles or what you're trying to leverage and what you're trying to protect. So if we start on there, we've got 4 areas. One is access control, the one is security operations, governance, and then how do I actually protect my actual assets from the environments. And if we start off with, where do we start off with our access control? And it covers off where we covered off, yes, the Entra Azure AD that we talked about, but how can we leverage permissions? How do we leverage Defender for Identity? Which cloud apps are we using? How am I leveraging the Azure Bastion, or do I need to leverage Azure Lighthouse, for example, because our organization is looking after multiple tenants for larger customers who might have gone through a significant number of acquisitions and got loads of tenants that they look after. What sort of administrative model should I build? Do I use role-based access control? What network security should I be implementing? The firewall manager, DDoS, web applications. And then how do I manage my endpoint? How do I administrate that? How do I protect those? But for access control, this is a good building blocks to start with, and understanding which of these areas you should consider and leverage inside your organization. If we then move on to this security operations, and that's really around detecting, responding, and recovering from attacks or identifying potential hidden threats. Again, there's so much information that can be leveraged, and this is what I touched on. You've got the Defender XDR, which you've got in place now, which will help you around endpoint, Office 365, identity, cloud apps, but also external attack surface management, bring that back in, and then linking that back into our Azure Defender for Cloud Services, which we talked about, which is covering your DevOps, your servers, your containers, key vaults, DNS. And there's so much of these areas that you've got to think about and configure and bring that in. And this needs to be monitored on a 24/7 basis. Gone are the days where we worked 8 till 6, Monday to Friday, and don't have to worry about it over the weekend. Unfortunately, what we are seeing is that with these alerts coming in, they need to be investigated. You've got 72 minutes on average from when the incident happens till them accessing your data or exfilling data. And that's quite scary. And it's, what is your strategy around that? How am I bringing in Sentinel? What is my incident response team? What threat intelligence am I feeding in? And for organizations who haven't done it, go and configure Microsoft Sentinel. Turn on the threat intelligence. Understand if you potentially have connections into your environment that you were not aware of. And it's quite interesting. We've just deployed Sentinel for one customer who thought they had it running. We deployed the rules and updated it, and then found out they were actually already compromised 6 months previously. The incidence was there, the intelligence was there, but there just wasn't configured, and nobody spotted that people were inside the system. And I think this is the bit that we're seeing more and more of, that the security team is different from the network operations center, the normal IT team. You need somebody dedicated to security inside your business to look after all of these areas. And each one of these are a skill set in its own right. We then talk about how do I protect my information, and this is more around purview, and this is your posture management, your compliance. So again, you can use your Defender for Cloud to look at your security. You can use your policies, look at your external attack surface, but also look at your purview. How do we deal with information protection? How do we discover the information that we have? How do we implement DLP? How do we make sure that we look at our insider risk, for example? how are we going to deal with subject access requests? And more people are leveraging Copilot or Copilot for Microsoft 365. And the advantages of using that on a day-to-day basis is significant. But again, it starts with data hygiene. What data hygiene do we have? As we covered previously with Copilot, it amplifies your security posture. And with Purview, you can not only create the labeling, the retention, the taxonomy for your data classification, you are able to understand what people are doing. Go and have a look at how many Copilot interactions do we have? Are we using it? What information is being surfaced with the Copilot, for example? Are people potentially utilizing it for services that they're not supposed to? But again, have a look at that. We talked about a lot of these areas, but for the people who's responsible for governance, these are the areas that you would tend to leverage inside the reference architecture, is to have a look at that more. How do I understand my data? How do I understand the data risk? What communication policies do I want to look at? How many times do I want to be notified when there's potentially a non-conformance, a customer complaint, or somebody trying to access data that they're not supposed to? And then we talked about asset protection. And again, this area is more, how do I protect my systems? How do I actually protect my environment? And for that, we'll be using things like web application firewall, backup and site recovery. And I think that I'm going to touch on that. Previously, for a while, you couldn't have immutable backups. Azure backup does allow you to have immutable backup. Make sure you turn it on, make sure it's configured, because we're still seeing too many organizations who might have not utilized it or used Azure backup who's not turned on the immutable feature. But go and think about it. Go and test it. Actually test a recovery of your environment. Not theoretically are we going to recover it, but do the actual test. Understand how long it's be. But then leverage all of these technology, leverage in the firewall, review the permissions on a regular basis, look at the Defender for cloud services, go and turn it on if you haven't done so, because it will show you very quickly, do I have attack paths? Do I have current risks in the system that I wasn't aware of? And then start looking at the new areas like GitHub Advanced Security, Azure DevOps Security to help your developers to be secure by design, because that's still one of the areas where we see the biggest risks, where developers needs to get it's that risk between development and quick to market, protecting my environment, protecting how we're going to protect that. What roles do we have in place? What access do I need? Make sure people have just enough access for what they need and not overexposed. Also think about how we're going to review that on an ongoing basis. Now I'm conscious I've run through these two slides, and it's actually two slides in the Microsoft Security Reference Architecture and the roles that we have. We haven't even looked at licenses covered in each of these areas and functions in these specifics, or how would I implement a zero trust model for my business. Each of these is a high level overview of what is capable with the Microsoft cybersecurity from Microsoft, what's possible. And I think you need a good understanding of where does your organization fit in? What are we leveraging? What aren't we leveraging? Why aren't we leveraging these areas? Do we need to go and potentially add on some licenses? And a lot of these are relatively inexpensive, like posture security management for service. It's like $5 a month. That's £3 or £4 at most. A lot of this is really cost effective, but once you've turned it on, make sure to actually look at it, make sure you understand it, and think about, by turning it on, do we really need all of the third-party applications that's out there? And as I mentioned earlier, Microsoft owns more than 25% of the market on endpoint security alone. If we talk about just endpoint security, think about that. They're probably better protected than anybody else, and they are looking to change the security. But that's just one small part of your security. It's what other attack vectors are there. Do I have a holistic view on that? And for some organizations, they go, okay, you've now overwhelmed me. We haven't even touched on what I would call the CISO checklist of areas that we should protect. But don't feel overwhelmed. Reach out to your account manager, speak to Softworks, reach out to any your existing providers, and understand where you are, how they can help you build that breach, that gap that you've got, and then how can you get the right security posture for your organization risk appetite versus cost. And that's what it always comes down. It's cost, expertise versus risk. In summary, hopefully what's come across, Microsoft now provides you with a comprehensive security end-to-end. There's probably a solution already that you own or out there that you're not aware of that Microsoft has in place. I'm not going to say Microsoft is great in everything, and we will be very open with you where we think there's gaps in place. And I've already touched on it. For example, the web filtering, it needs work long term. But go and review your security architecture, map it, actually map what is your security, what are your risks, not what you just think about it. And it's quite easy. We're all running day to day. We all got to keep the business running. We got our day jobs, but sometimes stop, think, and look at the gaps. Think about it from an attacker's point of view. They operate 24/7. What is their easy entry into the business? What are the risks, and how do you have the plans in place to recover? And I'm going to keep mentioning recover because we've seen organizations paying the ransoms, quite significant amounts of ransoms now. And it's, why should you pay the ransom? Can you recover without it? Let's prevent them from getting the data to start with, or if they did, let us demonstrate we've done everything within our capabilities, budget, and remit to protect our organizations. And finally, think about what security capabilities can I use in my role, or do I need to use in my role? Am I using it? Have I mapped it out? What do I actually need? Go and present that to your peers. Make sure that every area is covered, and where it isn't, escalate it to your leadership team. Let them understand these are the areas that we need. This is the risks. These are the areas that we can leverage by potentially upgrading a license or just spending some time and effort. Give you time to leverage these areas, or actually we've got it all turned on but we're not monitoring it 24/7. Help me, give me the resources where we can do that. And thank you very much. As I say, it was a 45 minutes. What I'm now going to do is I'm just going to ask if there's any questions around this. As I say, this was quite a large theory section, so I'm just going to look to the left here a little bit and see if I have some questions that's come up, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask some questions that's been put in place. So what we are seeing now at the moment is, yes, the slides will be made available afterwards, so feel free to have it. We've now had a question here. What is your take? I'll just, if we could publish it, what is your take at layer security versus platform? We've seen the ones that jumped on the full CrowdStrike platform suffered hard. Well, I think you're always going to have a risk, but CrowdStrike platform is just one part of it. That's not a fully comprehensive security. That was mostly around the endpoint security and breach detection around the endpoints and servers. My view on this is that everybody is going to suffer a breach at some stage. There is no guarantee in life, and that's why I always say to people, assume the worst, plan for the worst, hope for the best, as the old saying goes. But you got to think about it. Do we believe in layered security? I do believe in certain layered security in my high risk areas, and I'll give an example. We, in our group, a £1 billion group, we leverage Microsoft first, not Microsoft only. So for example, where we've got security, leveraging the Microsoft security, but also for our email, have that second AI second layered security behind the Microsoft to look at my emails, look at potential phishing emails, look at potential compromises that is missed, just to give me a different perspective, because my paranoia level is set to extreme. But again, Microsoft don't miss that much when you look at what is being identified by the secondary system. There's not that much that's being picked up. But then areas like Zscaler. But I think what's changed is Microsoft is now one of the biggest security players, and I rather be 99% secure across my whole estate with a proper view across area like data loss prevention, like purview, like compliance, have that holistic view, then trying to configure loads of different products that potentially clash, that don't integrate properly with each other, because there's more of a chance of leaving a gap inside your system, whereas you have this single holistic view. And let's be honest, a lot of these systems, let's take endpoint protection, great, the endpoint, but what about my Teams? What about Teams on my phone? What about if I access and upload documents directly to SharePoint? What about my identity in other applications potentially where it's not linked together? It is getting all of that understanding and working out what works well together. So for example, and I'm going to touch on maybe on this slightly, we use a password manager still because you need an independent password manager. So we do leverage Keeper with our privileged identity management, for example. That works really well. It is what security is appropriate for you based on your budget and your risk profile. And I think I would like to just say that is a big one. So we're all for layered security where it's appropriate or where you want to reduce your risk. But what you need to make sure when you layer these security over each other, that they are complementary. Unfortunately, I'm still seeing a lot of where it's saying, Microsoft bad, Microsoft is not great, this is not great. Well, when you go and look at if you go and look at the Mitra Ingenuity attack 2023-2024 results, Microsoft and CrowdStrike are top. It's quite interesting from a point of view. How long does it take to detect? How much noise levels do they have? How do they perform? They've done really well, but that's just one area of breaches. What happens with my cloud architecture, my DDoS, my WAF? Do I put something in front of my DDoS protection like Cloudflare or one of the other solutions that's out there? Also think about your recovery. We touch on Azure site recovery, Azure backup. That's a great layer defense. But do you know what? You might want to go and look at other area that helps you give you a second view of the data. So for example, in our group, we're looking at leveraging Rubrik, because not only does it guarantee have a warranty of 10 million if they can't recover your data, it helps me understand the potential personal identifiable information I hold in my backups. So it shows me my data posture security management. Now you've got my attention, because backup is backup. Let's be blunt about it. It works or it doesn't work. It's immutable or it's not. We test it. It works or it doesn't. But you start giving me areas to help me reduce my risk, then you've got my attention. And I think that is what you need to look at with your layered security is, where is Microsoft best? Where are they good enough versus the cost? And where's my highest risk that I might want to layer those across? And feel free to reach out. I'm happy to have a more in-depth discussion to understand what technologies you use, what we use, and I can very happily run through how I would approach it. And we do provide this service for organizations where we will run security workshops from a point of view. Right. Just seeing if there's any other questions coming in at the moment. Sorry, I'm just going to have questions. I'm just going to see questions. Yep, topics. Perfect. And if there's any other topics that you would like us to cover, if there's any of these areas that you want to deep dive in, please to reach out to me. Let me know which areas you want to cover off more. We are attending Ignite in Chicago in November, so we'll get the full lowdown from Microsoft directly of what's new, what's coming, and we will be presenting our findings of what we've seen. But again, go and have a look at your Copilot. Go and look at Copilot Studio if you haven't done so, for the people who's using it. Microsoft is running I think it's a 15% discount for 10 or more Copilot licenses at the moment. So promotion, reach out if you want to do it. But happy to have a discussion around any of these areas. Thank you very much for joining us today, and feel free to reach out, and appreciate your time. Have a nice day.